I was standing in the freezing rain with my entire life stuffed into 3 black trash bags, completely betrayed by my best friend. If you had told me that getting brutally evicted would lead to a rotting cabin in the woods, a terrifying secret, and millions in buried gold, I'd have called you insane. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when my entire reality collapsed. I had just finished a grueling 9-hour shift at a downtown Seattle coffee shop, my feet aching and my uniform smelling faintly of scorched milk and stale espresso. All I wanted was a hot shower and my bed. Instead, I walked into my apartment to find my roommate, Jessica, sitting on our cheap IKEA sofa with her boyfriend, Brad. Except, it wasn't just them. The living room was filled with cardboard boxes. My first thought was that Jessica was finally moving out. I should have been so lucky. "Hey, Emma," Jessica said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary sweetness she always used when she was about to do something incredibly selfish. "We need to talk." Brad didn't even look at me. He just kept scrolling on his phone, chewing a piece of gum with a dull, rhythmic smack. "What's going on, Jess? Whose boxes are these?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "They're Brad's," she said, crossing her arms. "Listen, things are getting really serious between us, and paying rent at 2 different places just doesn't make sense anymore. He's moving in." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. "Okay, when? Our lease isn't up for another 6 months. Are we breaking it?" "Well, no," Jessica replied, her eyes darting away for a fraction of a second before hardening into a cold stare. "Brad is moving in here, today, which means you need to find another place." The air in the room felt suddenly very thin. "What do you mean, today? You can't just kick me out, Jess. I live here. I pay half the rent." "Actually," Brad chimed in, finally looking up from his phone with a smug grin, "your name isn't on the lease, Emma, just Jessica's. You've been subletting illegally. We looked it up. You have no tenant rights." My blood ran cold. He was right. When we moved in 2 years ago, my credit score was wrecked from some unpaid medical bills, so Jessica had signed the master lease, and I had been transferring her my half of the rent via Venmo every single month. We had been best friends since freshman year of college. I trusted her implicitly. "You're kicking me out? With 0 notice?" My voice trembled, a mix of pure rage and sheer panic welling up in my throat. "I have nowhere to go, Jess. Seattle is completely unaffordable right now. Where am I supposed to sleep tonight?" "That's really not my problem, Emma," Jessica sighed, standing up as if I were merely an inconvenience blocking her path. "You can take the air mattress. Just have your stuff out by midnight. Brad's buddies are bringing the rest of his furniture in the morning." I didn't cry. I think I was too in shock to cry. Over the next 3 hours, I frantically threw everything I owned into garbage bags and cardboard boxes, hauling them down 3 flights of stairs to my beat-up 2012 Honda Civic. When I finally handed Jessica the key, she didn't even look me in the eye. For the next 4 nights, my car was my home. I parked in brightly lit Walmart parking lots, layering every sweater I owned over my chest to fight off the biting October chill. The condensation on the windows in the morning was a grim reminder of how far I had fallen. I had exactly $18,400 in my savings account, an inheritance from my late grandmother that I had sworn I would never touch unless it was an absolute emergency. Well, sleeping in a sedan with a stiff neck and a broken heater qualified. Every spare second at the coffee shop was spent scouring real estate apps. Renting a new apartment required first, last, a massive security deposit, and a pristine credit score, which I still didn't have. Then, on my 5th day of homelessness, I saw the listing. It wasn't an apartment. It was a foreclosure auction property. A tiny, 600 square foot cabin located about an hour east of the city, nestled deep in the damp, sprawling forests near Snoqualmie Pass. The asking price? $16,000. Cash only, as is condition. The photos looked dismal. A sagging front porch, peeling gray paint, and a roof that looked one heavy snowfall away from caving in. But it was cheap. It was a roof, and it would be mine. No landlords, no roommates, no Jessica. I contacted the listing agent, a slick, fast-talking guy named Thomas Gable. We met at the property the very next afternoon. The drive up there was beautiful but isolating. The paved road gave way to a deeply rutted dirt path that wound through towering Douglas firs, their thick canopies blocking out the pale autumn sun. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, the woods were cast in deep, eerie shadows. Thomas was waiting on the porch, nervously checking his watch. He didn't even try to sell me on the charm of the place. "I'll be totally transparent with you, Emma," Thomas said as he wrestled with a rusted key in the front door. "The property has been vacant for nearly 2 years. The previous owner, an old guy named Arthur Pendleton, was a bit of a recluse. He passed away in a nursing home, and the county seized the property for back taxes. It needs work, a lot of it." The door creaked open, groaning on its hinges. The smell hit me instantly, a thick, suffocating odor of damp earth, rust, and something sharply metallic, like old copper pennies. The interior was a single large room with a tiny kitchenette in the corner and a small bathroom sectioned off in the back. The floorboards were severely warped, and deep, frantic scratch marks scarred the baseboards near the front window, as if a large animal had tried to dig its way out. "Is it structurally sound?" I asked, my boots echoing hollowly on the wood. "The foundation is solid stone," Thomas replied quickly, eager to close the deal. "Look, if you have the cash, we can do the paperwork in my office by 5 today. It's yours, free and clear, but I wouldn't drag my feet." Investors snatch these lots up just for the timber. I looked around, the gloomy, cold room. It was terrifying. It was isolated. But as I rubbed my arms to ward off the chill, I realized it was better than the back seat of my Honda. "I'll take it," I said. By sunset, I was the legal owner of the creepiest piece of real estate in Washington state. My first week in the cabin was an absolute nightmare of buyer's remorse. The isolation was completely overwhelming. Once the sun went down behind the mountains, the woods plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing against the dirty window panes. There was no cell service, just a crackling landline that I had managed to get activated. The plumbing shrieked every time I turned on the tap, spitting out rusty brown water for 30 seconds before running clear. But the worst part was the sounds. Old houses settle, I knew that. But this cabin didn't just settle. It breathed. It groaned. On my 4th night, a massive Pacific Northwest rainstorm battered the roof. I was huddled under a pile of blankets on a cheap mattress I had bought at a thrift store, listening to the wind howling through the trees. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Thump, scrape, thump. It was coming from directly beneath me, under the floorboards. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. The sound was rhythmic, heavy, dragging, like someone or something moving, something incredibly heavy through a crawl space. I grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the cold hearth and sat up in bed, staring into the dark. I waited for an hour, but the sound eventually faded into the ambient noise of the storm. I didn't sleep a single wink that night. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a pale, gray light filtering through the trees. Exhausted and running on adrenaline, I decided I couldn't live in fear of my own house. If there were raccoons or rats in the crawl space, I needed to find out, block the entry points, and take control of my life. I started inspecting the floors, hands and knees, dragging an old flashlight along the warped pine boards. That's when I noticed it. In the center of the living room, partially covered by a thick, filthy rug that had been left behind by Arthur Pendleton, the floorboards were uneven. When I pushed the heavy rug aside, a cloud of dust billowed up, making me cough. Beneath the rug, 4 wooden planks were cut shorter than the rest. They weren't nailed down. They were simply wedged tightly into place, and the edges were deeply gouged, as if someone had pried them up over and over again with a crowbar. Curiosity overrode my fear. I grabbed the flat edge of my fire poker, wedged it into the gap between the boards, and pushed down with all my weight. With a loud crack, the old wood gave way, popping upward. I pulled the first board loose, then the second, third, and fourth. Beneath the floor wasn't a dirt crawl space like I expected. It was a perfectly square, concrete-lined cavity, a hidden compartment. I shined my flashlight down into the hole. Sitting at the bottom of the dusty concrete box was a heavy, dark green metal ammunition crate, the kind you buy at military surplus stores. It was locked with a thick brass padlock. My hands were shaking as I reached down and grabbed the handle. The box was shockingly heavy. I had to brace my boots against the floor to heave it up into the living room. It hit the floorboards with a dull, dense thud. I didn't have the key, but I had a hammer and a rusty chisel I had found in the kitchen drawers. It took me 20 minutes of frantic, desperate swinging, bruising my knuckles in the process, before the brittle brass padlock finally shattered. I took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and popped the metal latches. I opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a stack of leather-bound journals. They were old, the covers cracked and flaking, smelling intensely of mildew and old paper. I picked the top one up and flipped it open. The handwriting inside was frantic, sharp, and erratic, all written in faded black ink. The 12th of November, 2018. They are watching the tree line again. I saw the lights. They think, I don't know, they are waiting for me to leave, but I never leave. The perimeter is secure. I buried the main bulk by the old oak, but I need to keep the yellow close. The yellow keeps me safe. The yellow? I frowned, a chill running down my spine. I flipped to another page. The 4th of March, 2020. The scratching under the floor is getting louder. They know it's here. I have to split it up. If they get inside, they can't take it all. I won't let them take my life's work. I set the disturbing journal aside, my hands trembling even harder now. Beneath the journals lay a large, heavy pouch made of dark blue velvet. The drawstring was pulled tight. It looked like a bag you would keep dice in, but it was easily the size of a melon, and it weighed at least 15 pounds. I untied the knot and tipped the pouch over the floorboards. A cascade of heavy, dull yellow metal spilled out, clinking together with a rich, musical sound that I had never heard in my life in person, only in movies. Coins. Dozens and dozens of heavy, pristine gold coins. I picked one up, my mind entirely blank. It was large, much larger than a quarter, and surprisingly heavy. On one side, it featured a profile of a man with a thick beard. On the other, a springbok, antelope. I read the tiny lettering stamped along the edge. Krugerrand, it is fiend gold. I sat there on the dusty floor of my freezing, rotting cabin, surrounded by what had to be at least 100 ounces of solid gold. I pulled out my phone. Still, no service. I couldn't even Google what a Krugerrand was worth, but even with my limited knowledge, I knew an ounce of gold was worth thousands. I had just found a fortune. Enough money to buy an apartment in Seattle in cash. Enough to rub in Jessica and Brad's faces. Enough to change my life forever. I let out a breathless, half-hysterical laugh, dropping the coin back onto the pile. "Oh my God," I whispered to the empty room, but my laugh was cut short. Outside the window, the crunching of gravel shattered the silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. I froze, my eyes darting toward the front window. Headlights were sweeping across the peeling paint of the porch, casting long, menacing shadows across the living room walls. The engine of a heavy truck idled aggressively just outside my front door. I was completely alone, miles from civilization, with no cell service, surrounded by a fortune in gold that someone had clearly killed or gone insane trying to protect. And then, the truck's engine cut off. I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy car door slamming shut, followed by the crunch of heavy boots walking up my wooden porch steps. Panic is a physical thing. It doesn't just live in your mind. It seizes your throat, turns your blood to ice water, and makes your hands shake uncontrollably. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The heavy boots were on the porch now, just on the other side of the flimsy wooden front door. I had maybe 5 seconds to react. I dropped the Krugerrand I was holding, swept the scattered gold coins back into the dark blue velvet pouch, and yanked the drawstring tight. It was heavy, too heavy to carry while fighting for my life. I shoved the pouch deep underneath my thrift store mattress, kicking the empty metal ammunition crate back into the concrete cavity in the floor. I frantically threw the thick, dusty rug back over the pried-up floorboards just as a massive fist began pounding on the door. "Arthur! I know you're in there, you crazy old bat!" A deep, gravelly voice bellowed. The door rattled violently on its hinges. I scrambled backward, grabbing the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. My knuckles were white, my breathing ragged and shallow. I didn't say a word. I just prayed the lock would hold. "Arthur, open the damn door. I saw the lights from the highway. You owe my family, and I'm not leaving without what's ours." The man paused. Silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Then I heard him mutter a string of curses. The doorknob jiggled, then twisted hard. When it didn't give, the man didn't knock again. He kicked it. The wood around the deadbolt splintered instantly with a deafening crack. A second kick sent the door flying inward, slamming against the drywall and hanging drunkenly by one mangled hinge. Standing in the doorway was a towering, broad-shouldered man in a heavy Carhartt jacket, water dripping from his dark, unkempt beard. He held a heavy steel crowbar in his right hand. He stepped into the dim light of the cabin, the cold wind howling in behind him, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing there, clutching a piece of iron like a baseball bat. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the meager furniture, my boxes of clothes, and finally locking onto my terrified face. "You're not Arthur," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. "Get out!" I screamed, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. "I own this property now. The police are on their way." It was a bluff, and we both knew it. There was no cell service out here, and the landline cord was visible against the wall, severed by mice, years ago. The man let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "Own it? Thomas actually sold it, that slick little rat." He stepped further into the room, kicking the door shut as best he could behind him. "My name is Garrett. Arthur Pendleton was my uncle. And unless you want this night to end very badly for you, little girl, you're going to tell me exactly where you put it." "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice trembling. "There was nothing here, just old garbage. Take whatever you want and leave." Garrett took another step forward, tapping the crowbar against his thigh. "Don't play stupid." My uncle was a paranoid schizophrenic, but he wasn't broke. He drove the getaway van for the '98 armored transport heist down in Tacoma. 2 million in untraceable gold Krugerrands vanished that night. The statute of limitations ran out years ago, but the crew he worked with never stopped looking for him. They thought he fled to Mexico. But I knew he buried himself out here in the damp, guarding it like a dragon. My mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots, the heavy scratching under the floorboards. It wasn't an animal. It was Garrett. He had been trying to tunnel into the foundation from the outside before the storm flooded the ground. The journal entries about people watching the tree line, Arthur hadn't been hallucinating. He was being hunted by his own flesh and blood. Garrett's eyes suddenly darted downward. He noticed the thick rug in the center of the room. More specifically, he noticed the fresh wood splinters and the heavy dust that had been disturbed when I ripped up the floorboards. A cruel smile spread across his face. "You found it, didn't you?" "Stay back!" I yelled, raising the fire poker higher. He lunged. Garrett was massive, but he was overconfident. He swung the crowbar in a wide, lazy arc, expecting me to cower. Instead, fueled by pure, unadulterated adrenaline and the sheer rage of everything I had endured over the past week, I dodged to the left. I swung the heavy iron fire poker with every ounce of strength in my body, aiming low. The heavy iron connected with the side of Garrett's kneecap with a sickening crunch. He let out an agonizing roar, dropping the crowbar as his leg buckled beneath him. He crashed to the wooden floor, grasping his shattered knee, screaming obscenities. But as he fell, his heavy work boot caught the edge of the rug, dragging it backward and exposing the jagged, open hole in the floorboards. He saw the empty ammunition crate. He knew I had moved the gold. "I'll kill you!" Garrett hissed, his face red with pain and fury. He reached behind his back, fumbling beneath his thick jacket. When his hand reappeared, the dim light glinted off the black steel of a handgun. Time slowed down to a crawl. I saw the barrel of the gun rising toward me. I didn't think. I just reacted. I threw the heavy iron fire poker directly at his face and sprinted toward the mattress. The heavy iron grazed his shoulder, throwing off his aim just enough. A gunshot went off, a deafening, concussive boom that made my ears ring instantly, blowing a hole through the drywall just inches from my head. I dove onto the mattress, shoving my hand underneath the cheap fabric. My fingers brushed the velvet pouch. I grabbed it, the 15 pounds of gold dead weight in my hand, and scrambled toward the back window in the kitchenette. "You're not leaving here with my money!" Garrett roared, trying to drag himself upright using the kitchen island. But this rotting, awful cabin that I had regretted buying just an hour ago suddenly became my savior. The floorboards where Garrett was standing were completely compromised from the heavy water damage and the tunneling he had attempted from the outside. As he put his full 250-pound weight onto his good leg to take aim again, the wood let out a deafening groan. With a violent crash, the floor gave way beneath him. Garrett shrieked as he plunged downward, falling waist-deep into the rotted joists and the flooded, freezing mud of the crawlspace. His gun clattered across the linoleum floor, spinning away into the darkness. He was wedged tight, trapped by the jagged, splintered pine boards clamping around his waist. I didn't stay to watch him struggle. I threw a wooden dining chair through the back window, shattering the glass, and vaulted outside into the freezing rain, clutching the velvet bag to my chest. I ran through the pitch-black woods to my Honda Civic, my boots slipping in the mud, gasping for air. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and slammed the keys into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I threw it in reverse, spinning the tires in the gravel, and tore down the long, rutted dirt road, leaving the cabin and Garrett Pendleton far behind in the darkness. I drove for 20 minutes at breakneck speed until the bars on my cell phone suddenly lit up. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway, my hands shaking so violently I could barely dial 911. By sunrise, the cabin was swarming with state troopers and federal agents. I spent the next 48 hours in a sterile, brightly lit interrogation room in downtown Seattle. Two agents from the FBI's Violent Crimes Division, Agent Miller and Agent Davis, listened to my story over and over again. They confiscated the gold, taking it into evidence. For a terrifying day, I thought I was going to lose everything. I thought I would be right back to sleeping in my car. But life finally decided to throw me a lifeline. It turned out Garrett Pendleton was wanted on multiple felony warrants across 3 states, and the gold? It was definitively linked to the 1,998 Tacoma armored car heist, just like Garrett had said. However, because Arthur Pendleton had technically died intestate, and because I had legally purchased the property and all its contents in a legitimate county auction, the situation fell under a bizarre, highly specific set of salvage and recovery laws. I didn't get to keep the stolen Krugerrands. They belonged to the insurance company that had paid out the claim decades ago. But the insurance company had a standing, legally binding reward offer for the recovery of the assets. A finder's fee. 3 months later, a check was wired into my bank account. The amount? $450,000. Tax-free. I never went back to that cabin in the woods. I sold the land to a timber company for $30,000, almost double what I paid for it, and let them bulldoze the rotting structure to the ground. Garrett went to federal prison, and the terrifying chapter of Arthur Pendleton's haunted hideaway was closed forever. With the reward money, I didn't just survive, I thrived. I bought a gorgeous, sun-drenched, 2-bedroom condo in Bellevue, completely in cash. I furnished it with beautiful things, stocked the fridge with expensive groceries, and finally slept in a bed where I felt entirely, unconditionally safe. But the sweetest moment of this entire ordeal happened about 6 months later. I was walking out of a high-end bakery downtown, carrying a box of pastries when I bumped into someone on the sidewalk. It was Jessica. She looked exhausted. Her hair was messy, her jacket looked worn, and the fake, sugary sweetness was entirely gone from her face. She stared at me, then at the expensive designer coat I was wearing, and finally at the brand-new luxury SUV I had just unlocked with my key fob. "Emma?" she asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "Wow, you look really good. How have you been? Where are you living?" I looked at the girl who had thrown me out into the freezing rain without a second thought. I thought about the nights in my freezing Honda, the terror in the dark cabin, and the heavy weight of the gold in my hands. "I'm doing amazing, Jess," I smiled, a genuine warm smile. "How are things with Brad?" Her face fell, a bitter shadow crossing her eyes. "Oh, we broke up. He kicked me out of the apartment last month. He claimed he signed a new lease without me. I'm sleeping on my sister's couch right now. It's been a nightmare. Karma, it turns out, is remarkably efficient when she wants to be." "That's awful, Jess. Truly. Good luck with everything," I said gently. I didn't offer her money. I didn't offer her a place to stay. I simply turned around, got into my beautiful warm car, and drove away, leaving her standing there on the sidewalk, wondering how the girl she threw away had managed to strike gold. If you love this crazy story of instant karma, terrifying twists, and buried treasure, hit that like button right now. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications